Without further ado, let me just introduce the panel very, very quickly. We have Bríd Brennan, political educator, activist from Ireland, also from the Transnational Institute. So we have her here today. Thank you for being here with us today. We have Jeremy Corbyn, a person who obviously needs no introduction, former leader of the Labour Party, founder of the Peace and Justice Project, long life activist, just a man for whom words, I lack words to describe. So, Jeremy Corbyn, everybody. Last but not least, our very own Yanis Varoufakis, the M25 co-founder, Merit 25 movement. Thank you so much. If I may ask you, Bríd, just for a quick reflection about yesterday's proceedings in The Hague, what can you tell us about that? What was your impression, and what do you think the Hague group will achieve?
Okay, good morning. Good morning, people. Good morning. I believe we're going to have a good conversation here today. I think it's wonderful that we have, this morning we had a very heavy frost, and now, by midday we have the sun. And I think this is so symbolic. It's symbolic also where we're at in the world, between winter and spring. And I think we're very much in the moment of spring. Despite that winter is not yet really gone. And I think this describes very well the dynamic of the political balance of forces in the world, but also, in a way, the challenges we face as movements, committed parliamentarians, people who are opening up new territories, I think, for our thinking. So yesterday was I think it was very significant. Why do I think that? We had 9 governments who came together with a collective statement, and I think the essence of the statement and its importance was the following: that it reiterated the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to an independent state as Palestine. And I think this cannot be reiterated and repeated. It has to continue to be at the top of the agenda, I think. And also its significance in a sense that the departure point at this early part of the new year in relation to Palestine was really to give a new impulse to that. And related to it, there were I think if you look at the inaugural message and statement, there were 3 very interesting action points, but they really had to do very much with the fact that 2 areas. One is the whole question of the military and political support. It deals mainly with the military support. That every government has obligations under the UN to actually prevent the transfer of military supplies to upholding the Zionist occupation and destruction of Palestine. I think this is very crucial. And the second one was no harbour for ships that are transferring. And each state has the capacity to do that. And I believe these are elements that kind of open up, and of course, there was also the reiteration that this is not simply for the handful of states that came together in The Hague to follow up on last year. This really is a call to all states, but I do think it's also a call to us as movements, and in a number of ways. We know especially from the contradictions that sort of are expressed in the multilateral system that was built after the Second World War, that without the people's involvement, not only involvement, engagement, mobilization, this will not happen. There will not be a spring for Palestine, and there will not be a spring for Europe, for Europe we would hope, but also for the world. And I guess that's what our conversation here today is going to be like. I would just like to indicate from the Transnational Institute, we've been, well, we do lots of things in our own way, but maybe just also the Transnational Institute in a way was a child born a little bit after Second World War. Actually, we celebrated 50 years this past year, but it came out of an idea, actually, that really then attracted amazing people. And I think this is what really our whole function, Progressive International, dedicated parliamentarians, is about. We have to recover our capacity for the political imaginary. You know, winter can really block out a lot of things, but spring can reopen it. And I really believe we're in that moment. And therefore, when we talk about the Universal Declaration, which has many very important elements, I would put beside it something that came about 10, 15 years after, called the Universal People's Declaration of Rights and Liberation. And this was done in the Charter of Algiers in 1976. And this, in a sense, I think this is what we have to recover also when we are talking about rights. We have to really factor the people's capacity, the people's mobilization, and the people's struggle into this. So I would then maybe wind up by saying, I hope many of us here are anticipating the year that is coming. We're going to have another wonderful opportunity in The Hague in June. The NATO summit is in June in The Hague. So we have to see how we are going to be there. I think this is going to be this could be a major Dutch people's response, but also European people's response to really, in a sense, not only call out the complicity, and I mean, you know, there's now, Mr. Rutte is now Prime Minister of NATO, or Prime Minister of the North Atlantic Organization, but I think that this can be a moment of focus for our next chapter of mobilization. So I'll leave it at that. I'm sure Jeremy and Yanis will have much more to add. No, I'd just like to say, you know, it's so comfortable sitting here with Jeremy. I mean, for those of us who think, you know, unity and finding common agendas is impossible, well, Jeremy is from Britain, I'm from Ireland, and we do feel very comfortable with each other in a good sense of self-determination.
Thank you so much, Bríd. May I ask that, Jeremy, would you like to give your take on yesterday's proceedings and also maybe respond to some of the things that Bríd has said?
Can I start?
Yeah, of course. Do as you wish.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me, and good morning, everybody. And, this is a wonderful centre, but I'm feeling very sorry for the people on rows 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the centre block here. Sorry about the sun. I blame Yanis. Why not? And to have this event here is great, and I'm glad I was able to come along, so I'm going back to London later on today. And what I want to do is talk about a few international issues, and then and before that a little bit about the politics of what's happening in my own country, so that you have some understanding of where we're going on this. Yesterday we had the convention to launch the Hague Declaration on Palestine, which was a wonderful event, and well done Progressive International, which organised that and put it together. And it's a sign of the times that the primary international for the left is the Progressive International, because it encompasses some governments, some political parties, some trade unions, lots and different localised and community activist groups all around the world, and that is really what international cooperation is about. And Yanis and I were very proud to be part of the foundation of it, and we're both members of the Council of Progressive International. And Bríd very kindly said some nice things about us over many years. I first met Bríd here in Amsterdam in about 1983 or 4 at a TNI event. And TNI is an organisation I've got a lot of time and a lot of respect for. Its thoughts, its publications, and its work. And just think of these organisations like TNI around the world and the way that they contribute to our debate. In Britain, as you know, the Labour Party moved itself many degrees to the right in 2020 after I ceased to be the leader of the party. It wasn't solely that, there was a lot of pressures within the party after our period of leadership. And I was suspended from the parliamentary caucus of the Labour Party, and thus my own community in Islington was prevented from choosing any candidate to be the Labour candidate for the subsequent general election. And this standoff lasted for about 2 years. I was an independent member of Parliament during that time, and then just before the 2024 general election, the Labour Party announced they were setting up a selection process for Islington North. So I wrote a very polite letter to the General Secretary. Dear David, you'll remember me. I'm available to be a candidate for Islington North. To whom do I send my biographical details so that the members can vote on the subject? And he wrote back and said, the National Executive has decided that you're not eligible to be considered as a candidate. And so I wrote back immediately another very polite letter, another Dear David letter. Dear David, I'm very interested in this decision. Could you tell me how it was taken? And could you tell me how I can appeal against it under the normal rules of natural justice? And he then wrote back a very short letter saying, Dear Jeremy, you must be aware that the Labour Party has removed all consideration of rules of natural justice from its rules and constitution at its annual conference last year. You have no rights to appeal, and you have no rights whatsoever to hold public office ever again on behalf of the Labour Party. And so I then sent him a video 3 days later announcing I was an independent candidate for Islington North. And we had an amazing response of local people as well as from outside, and starting from zero we ran the best possible campaign we could on all of the platforms we put forward in the 2017 and 2019 elections. And particularly because of the rise of intolerance, of racism, of nastiness within our society, we put on my main election leaflet, refugees are welcome here. And we won. After the general election of 2019, we founded the Peace and Justice Project, which has around 60,000 subscribers to it. It's a combination of political, social and creative and international activity. We've held 2 international conferences, and we're holding a 3rd conference this September, which will be a combination of international and national. The first day will be on international issues. The second day will be on more UK-focused economic and social justice issues. We're working with independents all over the country. We've formed a very effective alliance of those independents, and this will form into a coherent political voice. I'm not saying there's going to be a new political party tomorrow, because I do think that any political voice and political organisation, as I suspect most of you in this room would agree with me, cannot be just a narcissistic opportunity by a few people in the capital city of any country. It has to be based within the strength of community activity, with community action, with those campaigns on health, on housing, on equality, on justice, opposition to racism, and all of those issues. And so it is, yes, a slightly slower process, but you'll get there in a stronger place because you will have the foundations within communities and within society as a whole, and you'll be listening to a much wider range of people. And so what we're doing in my own community, for example, is that every 6 weeks or so we hold a a public open forum, a people's forum, in which I do my report to the community and what I've been doing as their Member of Parliament, and take questions and discussion on that, and then the majority of the meeting is then taken up with whatever issue we have decided we're going to be debating that time. The first one was on housing, where we had tenants' representation, those that are suffering from dangerous cladding. We had representatives of homeless people speaking, and homeless people themselves came to the event to speak. The second one was specifically and only on mental health, the causes of the rise of mental health crises, the lack of services for people going through a mental health crisis, but also the societal impacts of stress, low wages, bad housing, stress at work, or stress of unemployment, and stress of poverty, which creates the mental health crisis that affects so much of Western Europe and North America. And the one we held on Thursday evening was on workers' rights and focused on the gig economy, and we leafleted the cafes and the mosques where the delivery riders congregate, and so we had speakers who were themselves delivery riders working in the gig economy on their lack of rights and representation, and how we can work with them on that. And there is a union organised now in Britain, the IWGB, organising particularly Uber and Deliveroo riders, and they're having a day of action on the 14th of February when we're asking all Uber workers, drivers, riders and so on to log off for, I think it's 4 or 6 hours, and the rest of us refuse to take Uber during that period as an act of solidarity with them, where their demands for decent wages and real working conditions, job protection, job security and insurance in their place of work. And so the campaign for union rights for Uber and other workers is actually central to the campaign for social justice in our society. You think of the huge unions that exist in all of our countries, were all founded essentially during industrialisation of the late 18th, 19th and early 20th century, and they have their roots in those huge industrial struggles in the mines, the steelworks and the shipyards and so on, all across this continent. The struggle for union and workers' rights now is those working in the gig economy, those working in retail, those working in insecure places. We've got to be part of that struggle, and they need to be with us in that struggle. So let's make sure we do organise all of that. And that, of course, leads into often some very difficult areas where documentless people are being grotesquely exploited in the gig economy. We've got to be in solidarity with them. There is no future for a union that ignores the status of somebody, or rather says it will not take people into membership because they're not documented workers. We need to get them documented and get them recognised to be part of our society. Now, the other things we're doing in the PJP is I do not believe that socialism, social justice and struggle is just about theories and ideas and action. Of course it is all of those things, but it's also about the creativity of the way which we approach our lives and approach this world. And so our project has produced 2 books over the past year, one called Poetry for the Many, which is a collection of poetry selected by Len McCluskey, the former General Secretary of Unite the Union, myself and a few others, and many other people, including Michael Rosen and others have put forward poems in this book. We selected it, we published it. I was astonished at how well it sold. It's now in its 3rd edition, and we've been doing poetry events all over the country. An amazing combination of people turn up at poetry events because they want to talk about ideas and inspiration and where they come from. And I always say to young people, if you do write poetry, don't be ashamed of it, be proud of it, and please read it out to the rest of us, because poets often tell the truths that others will not. And so it's been, to me, even to me, an eye-opener of the creativity of so many people all around as we're doing this. And I'm doing another book next year called Poetry from the Many, which is going to be a publication of all the hundreds of poems I've been sent ever since we produced this book. So it's a way of encouraging creativity. We also have Music for the Many, where we do regular music concerts in support of independent musicians, independent music venues, and we've got one at the 100 Club tomorrow night in Oxford Street in London. The other book we produced is called MAG, The Monstrous Anger of the Guns, and that comes from the First World War poem by Wilfred Owen, who the words are, "What music was there for those men that die like cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns," as they were mown down on the Western Front. And our book is an analysis of the global arms trade, the 24 trillion a year that's spent on the global arms trade, and what that could be used for, and how we need to be serious campaigners for peace and for justice, and a reduction in arms expenditure, and a conversion of those industries into something that is socially useful. Think of how much even 10% of the 24 trillion on arms could achieve in environmental sustainability, healthcare and education all around the world. And so our book, again, is now in its second edition, and we're doing a lot of events on that. And some of the conversations are quite complicated. Going to a town where there is a lot of people working in the arms industry, they want a job. They're not our enemies. They need a job. They need their skills to be used for something else. And that's what we're putting forward in this book. And it's, I'm very proud of the work we've achieved on that. So all these things are bringing a lot of people together. The principle being, we bring people together on causes, on justice, and build a movement from that. And that movement is growing very, very fast. I'm going to get told off for going much longer, so I'll be very brief on the last things I want to say. Is that all right? Yes. Yesterday was to me, a historic day. The Hague Declaration was amazing, and the fact that 9 countries were there yesterday supporting it and publicly declaring for it, and I'm very confident that quite a few other countries are going to join in very soon. Governments are going to join in, as well as popular movements, and it is essentially building on the work of those of international solidarity with the people of Palestine. But it has taken 47,000 recorded deaths in Gaza to get to this position. Goodness knows how many more bodies are going to be discovered in Gaza as the rubble begins to be cleared. And also the numbers of people that are now dying in the West Bank. And the occupation of the West Bank is intensifying, and there are strong moves in Israel to annex the whole of the West Bank. And Trump's suggestion of depopulating the entirety of Gaza is as appalling as it is disgusting. And so our solidarity with the people of Palestine is absolutely unwavering. Many awful things have been thrown at and said against all of us who support Palestine. The Palestine Solidarity Movement in Britain and Stop the War Coalition and others have organised now 24 national marches since October 23, and many more before that. And the biggest one had almost 1 million people on it. And so it is a huge movement. They've been called the most appalling things. Our marches are a march of hope, a march of peace, a march of love. The biggest block on it is actually the Jewish block of people in solidarity with the people of Palestine. So please, let's not hear these disgusting attacks on us. We are people of unity and of peace, and of all religions and none, all backgrounds, and very different people from all around the world. We are an anti-racist movement, as well as a movement in solidarity with the people of Palestine. And that is important to keep that there, and to keep that solidarity going, and recognise there are also some wonderful people in Israel who are campaigning to end the occupation. Our great friend Varoufakis, who's a member of the Knesset, has himself been suspended now, hasn't he, from the Knesset, and he's been suspended because he supports Palestine and the Palestinian people. And that's an example of what the bravery of those people are. So we've got many more marches and demonstrations to come until we get to that day when Palestine can be at peace and under recognition. But you know what? Just imagine you're a young child in Gaza, and you've seen your home destroyed, your mum, your dad, your brothers, your sisters, your aunties, your uncle, your cousins, all of your family, all of your community destroyed, and you're the only one who survives. The rest of your life you're going to have, just as people coming out of the concentration camps had in 1945, a survivor's guilt. The mental health scars of this bombardment of Gaza will be intergenerational for a very, very long time to come. And so our support has to be there for a very long time, for the long haul, with the people of Palestine. And I say to those governments that have knowingly supplied bombs guided missiles, laser weapons, drones, and all the other things to Israel to target their bombing of Gaza, you know what you've been doing. You know that you've been directing missiles to destroy schools and hospitals and homes. You know what you've been doing. And if the International Court of Justice and the ICC say it's an act of genocide, then I believe it is. And if they say that people have committed war crimes, and I believe they have, then those that supply the weapons are also guilty of those crimes as well. There's so much more internationally. I want to say this, but just quickly. The war in Russia and Ukraine is abominable and appalling. Conscripted soldiers from Russia are killing conscripted soldiers from Ukraine. It's almost like First World War mentality fighting that's going on. There has to be a ceasefire. There has to be an end to that war. It is not a solution to simply pour weapons in on either side into the conflict. There has to be a pathway to peace somehow. Or are we to go and see this as being the driving force of a new generation of a European arms industry to feed weapons into Ukraine, just as much there'll be a new generation of weapons industries in Russia, China and India and other places to feed it the other way around. We have to be that voice that's prepared to step up bravely and say there has to be a halt to this, there has to be a ceasefire, there has to be a way forward so that the people of Russia and Ukraine can live in peace. I don't condone what Putin did. I don't condone that at all. That's not my point. My point is that people of the area deserve to be able to live in peace, and we have to be that voice for their peace as well, and we need to keep saying that. Our media reporting of conflicts is very selective. Barely any reporting of the conflict in Sudan or the role of the UAE in it or the pouring of arms into Sudan, and almost no reporting of what's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the mineral companies' interests in removing coltan and cobalt from the Congo in advance of every other thought they've got. The occupation of Goma and the east of Congo is going to lead to some most horrific conflict, and it is very important that we show some solidarity with the people of the Congo who've been so grotesquely exploited, now being occupied, all because they have the temerity to live above very valuable minerals in the ground, not one bit of which they've ever benefited from in any way. And so let's have some solidarity with the people of the Congo and not pour arms into there, but pour into our support and our solidarity for their ability to live in peace. The last thing I'd say is this: we're to move at a time in Europe when the rise of the far right is frightening and obvious. Far right here in the Netherlands, France, Germany, Austria, Britain, Italy, Hungary, you know the places as well as I do. And you know the way in which the racists behave. Every economic problem is blamed on migrants, every economic problem is blamed on immigrants, and in the case of Britain, you'd have thought that every problem of social funding of schools, of hospitals, of housing and everything is somehow or other the responsibility of desperate people getting into an unsafe boat trying to cross the channel from Calais. It's nonsense, and they know it's nonsense, but it works. This sort of cheap racist stuff works, and we go to every community and say, well, if there weren't all these refugees, we'd have all the housing we need. It's absolutely nonsense. The reason there's a housing shortage, the reason there's underfunding in education, the reason there's underfunding in the health service is inequality and wealth within our society, in which a taxation system drives resources towards the wealth and takes it away from the mass of the population. So the left needs to confront the racists, yes, with an anti-racist message, but also with a message of social justice, equality, and investment in the environmental and other services that we need. That has to be the way forward to defeat the racists. Bríd said, this is the start of spring. It's a very early spring, I have to say, Bríd, but that's fine by me. That's okay. We need that voice all across Europe, indeed all across the world, in opposition to racism, and to give people hope and an expectation. The next generation will live better than this generation does. At the moment, we're going into intergenerational poverty and depression. We need to have that sense of hope. You only get that sense of hope from the unity of popular movements bringing about peace, social justice, and environmental sustainability in our world. People have been through troughs many times in history, but they've got out of those troughs. and brought us some fantastic achievements and changes. We're getting out of that trough now. Let's unite against racism. Let's unite for social justice. Let's unite for peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much very much for that. Just passing the microphone to Yanis. Just before I give the word to Yanis, just a brief comment. If you want to know more about the Peace and Justice project, go to thecorbynproject.com. You can find all the information you want there. And now I'll pass over the word to Yanis. Yanis, who last year was banned from entering Germany for calling a genocide a genocide. And he was also the leader of our pan-European movement, the M25, and our Greek party, Meta25. Yanis.
This morning, just before leaving the hotel to get here, somebody on X, Twitter, took a swipe at me for being fixated with Palestine. It was in response to a post celebrating yesterday's inauguration of the Hague Group. And it seemed that it was a left-wing criticism, that I was fixating, we are fixating with Palestine, and there was a long list of other conflicts and tragedies that I was not paying attention to. We are not paying attention to, like Goma in the Congo, in the Sudan, the killing fields of Ukraine, what's happening in Myanmar, and so on. And I thought about it for a second. And I realized that I'm proud of being fixated with Palestine. Because if this was 1936, we all would have a moral obligation, an ethical duty to be fixated with the Nazis and their persecution of the Jewish people. If this were the 1960s and 70s, we would have a duty to be fixated with apartheid in South Africa. If this was 1981, we would have an obligation to be fixated over the hunger strikes in the Maze prison in Northern Ireland. To be fixated in 1936 about the plight of the Jewish people was not to ignore all the other massacres of the British Empire, for instance, in India, in Kenya. No, you fixate on the issue at hand in order to develop, firstly, your own understanding of what it means to fight against injustice, and then to take this fixation and turn it into a global fight for peace, justice, and progress. This is what we're doing. In particular, it is essential that this fixation with Palestine is blended with a capacity to recognize the interconnections between our different predicaments. Jeremy and Bríd talked about them, the arms trade, the war in the Ukraine. It is astonishing that there is a war happening in Europe, and Europe is cheerleading a United States whose only purpose, let's see what Trump is going to do, but so far the revealed preference of the United States is for a never-ending war. A war that never ends. This is what they want. Like Netanyahu. Netanyahu doesn't want a ceasefire, he doesn't want peace, because his personal interests lie in a never-ending war. And it's astonishing to have a Europe, which was supposedly a peace project. The whole point of the European Union, it was celebrated as a way to end wars forever in Europe. And you have a European Union. So, a European Union which betrays its own propaganda as to its raison d'etre by having this half-crazy person, Kaja Kallas, being our foreign and defense representative, the former Prime Minister of Estonia, who 3 weeks before she became the European Union's responsible person for, chief of defense and foreign affairs, advocated in a televised interview the need to break Russia up. Now, this is madness, this is paranoia. Anybody who believes that should be locked up, not be made responsible for Europe's defense and foreign affairs. Now, why did we get there? Why are we, not we, you and me, but our governments, so complicit, not only sending 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, which is what Germany does, but also utterly and constantly supporting the Zionist narrative that the people of Gaza don't have the right to resist, and the equation of the duty to resist with anti-Semitism. How did we get there? We were not always there. I mean, I remember a very right-wing, corrupt, but rather unpalatable president of France. Remember Jacques Chirac? Once he went to the occupied territories, and he actually had a physical confrontation with the Israeli soldiers, and he called them names, and he called them occupying force. Now, can you imagine Emmanuel Macron doing this today? No way. Even if he believes it, he won't do it, because he is going to be utterly destroyed by Le Monde, by Nouvel Observateur, by the media. So what happened to a Europe? Unless we are fixated with Palestine, we cannot understand it. And let me explain that point. Before I salute you for being here, and before I thank our local group of DM25 for putting up this remarkable meeting today. Thank you very much in advance. Now look, you can see from the moment that Donald Trump gets elected, a man who loathes the European Union, who has put forward a very cogent and logical, I don't say correct, I say logical, rationally structured, not rational, case against the existence of the European Union. Somebody who calls the European Union a leech on American business, and who is going definitely to impose tariffs on German, Dutch exports to the United States. So this man, who is the actual nightmare of the liberal establishment in Holland, in France, in Germany, gets elected. And what do the European leaders do? They compete against one another as to who is going to be the first to leak his boots. So you have a Europe which is completely and utterly dependent. It is a vassal continent of the United States. Now, we are beginning now to understand why you have a situation, think about it. The United States, together with Ukraine and maybe Poland, blew up Nord Stream 1, which is an investment of the Federal Republic of Germany in its fuel resources. Now, I'm not saying it was right to invest in that or wrong to invest in that, but what I'm saying is that, they blew it up. This was a terrorist attack on a German asset of massive value to German industry. I'm not talking about the working class, us leftists, to them, to the capitalists, to Germany. And what do? They look the other way. And they allow the rumors to spread that it was Putin who blew up his own means of supplying Germany with his own natural gas, which makes no sense. And yet you have the BBC, Deutsche Welle, and so on going along with that. Now, why all this magnitude of total dependence on whatever it is that Washington, D.C. has decided? Well, allow me, because I have a relationship with certain people of a Dutch extraction, like Jeroen Dijsselbloem, for instance. I have this prior experience of watching them destroy Europe. Because what they did to us here in Greece was not just north-south. It was not just, the busy bees, the mighty, highly productive ants of Germany and of Holland, of the north, having a little tussle against the grasshoppers of the south who laze in the sun and don't work. This was all bullshit. What it was a cynical attempt, after the northern European banks went belly up, to bail them out and to charge the bill to the peoples of Europe, beginning the ones in the south, because they were the most bankrupt, and then bringing the austerity to the north. This is what they did. We were the guinea pig, the laboratory of austerity. They practiced on that, then they came to you immediately after us, because we are the blacks of Europe, as I was told by an Irishman when I was a student and a member of Troops Out in England. So they took it to Ireland, then they took it to his country, Portugal. He comes from Portugal. Then from Portugal they took it to Spain, Italy, France, and then to Germany, and to you folks. Okay, the reason why your social services are diminishing and so on is that it is this process of austerity for the many and largesse, socialism in inverted commas, for the very few. They printed 6 trillion euros to give to the bankers. The bankers gave it to the big business. The big business did not invest it. Why did they not invest it? Because they looked at all of us around you and they said, these people don't have money. So as if we are going to invest in products that these people can't afford. So what did they do with these 6 trillion euros? You know, BAS, Volkswagen, Alstom, and so on. You know what they did? They went to the stock exchange and bought their own shares. Their shares went up, they didn't invest anything. And you know what? Guess what? Europe, for 15 years, has not invested in anything. Zero net investment in Europe. This has never happened in the history of the universe, not the world. To have such a rich continent, with all these savings and money, and profits, and real estate, not investing. But the Chinese and the Americans invested in greener technologies, in what I call cloud capital, algorithms, AI, and all that. And you know what? We've become the stupid continent. We missed out on one whole technological revolution. So, you know, we are now, and we've already entered, after all these 15 years, a steady process of secular stagnation. This is not a crisis that will go down and then will go up. For the next 50 years, we're condemned to stagnate as a continent. When a continent like Europe, which is so powerful and so rich, stagnates, what happens is the politics starts fragmenting. This is why Emmanuel Macron doesn't even have the guts of Jacques Chirac, or why Olaf Scholz cannot even be like, you know, Schroeder, who said no to the invasion of Iraq. A despicable, poor excuse for human nature, Schroeder was, but at least he said no to the invasion of Iraq, along with, who was it, Sarkozy? No, Chirac. Yeah, Chirac, yeah. Against, no, Sarkozy was, no. Anyway, sorry, big mistake. So the point I'm making is that the reason why we are so complacent, the reason why the far right is rising everywhere, universally, why is the far right rising up? For exactly the same reason why it was rising up in the mid-war period. We had, in 1929, just like in 2008, Wall Street collapsed. The banks of Europe immediately collapsed. After 1929, after 2008. Then after that, what happened? Governments started pushing the losses of the bankers onto the shoulders of the weakest of citizens. After 1930, 31, after 2009, 2010. Exactly the same. It was as if they were trying to replicate the mid-war period. And then you had an investment strike. Industrialists were not investing. I explained that. This is exactly what happened in the 1930s. Discontent grew. The left-wing parties, the center-left parties, overthrew people like Jeremy, people like me. I remember Ramsay MacDonald in the kind of thing that was happening. The left, the center-left, was purging itself, trying to adapt to the center, which was the center which was shifting increasingly to the right, being pushed by those who genuinely looked at people in the eye and said, I feel your pain. I feel your pain. You've never had it so bad. Your children are going to have a far worse life than you did. I feel your pain. Give me the power and I'll make you great again. And those were the fascists back then, and they're the fascists today. In this context, a Europe that is politically fragmented, it is becoming a vassal of the powers that be, in this case, Washington, D.C., cannot do anything to oppose the never-ending war in Ukraine, cannot do anything to oppose its own secular stagnation, and when Netanyahu, along with Genocide Joe, Biden, place a whole people, the people of Gaza, on death row, because this is what they did. They placed a whole people on death row. The Europeans, they look like a dog that doesn't understand what it is that you're saying to it. You do this. You have, Ursula von der Leyen. She projects the flag of Israel on the buildings, and at the same time, she has to, in the context of explaining why Europe is utterly committed to international law, she has to explain why she's not going to abide by the International Criminal Court's decision to indict Netanyahu. So they are in total disarray. Their utter stupidity, their half-crazed madness would have been something to write scripts, theater plays about, and to enjoy if it wasn't so tragic for Europe and for the rest of the world. So here is my conclusion, and it is this. After a year and a half of these massacres that I think Jeremy described so aptly through the eyes of a child that has survived the bombing and will be living under this cloud of survival kit forever. Under that awful and dark light, we have a situation where the people of Europe have decoupled from their leadership. The mood, even here in Holland, even in Germany, has shifted. People no longer buy the lie that Israel is defending itself. But our government, look at take the case of the Netherlands. The mood has shifted in the people. In your parliament, there's hardly anyone who talks about genocide. Hardly anyone. So what happens when you have this huge disconnect between the people and the elected politicians? The answer is things like today. Events like this is why DiEM25 is calling upon you to join us. This is why the Progressive International is calling upon people around the world to join us. As my great friends and comrades have said, this is a time for unity and for solidarity, for the sake of Europe, for the sake of rationality, of logic, and, also for having some fun, because nothing is fun in this life unless we're all together to fight for what is just. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, resistance is never futile. I'm being told that Jeremy has to leave us, unfortunately. So I would like you to just, give a grand applause to Jeremy Corbyn.